everybody. Good morning, good afternoon to you, good evening, wherever the heck you might be. Welcome to Friday afternoon Tech Talk webinar. Today's discussion, as you can see, is in preparation of SPOG integration. We'll define what SPOG is in case you don't know what that is. Probably should have told you, but it's packaged. So I'm doing some package integration. We're working on version 12.5 here. I'm going to go ahead and get started. We'll, I don't know exactly how, but our marketing people have a copy of these slides. We'll make all this stuff available to you. We're, of course, I believe, recording the session. It says it's recording, and we'll have that posted up on our next page, some way, shape, or form for you to access in case you don't get everything I say here along the way. So don't feel like you have to hang on everything, but welcome to you. Let me mute my video over here for some bandwidth purposes. I will assume you can still see what I'm sharing out here. I should be sharing out the presentation. If otherwise, let me know. I need at least one person out there to confirm that you can, in fact, hear what I'm saying. If somebody doesn't mind.
Sound good.
Perfect.
Yep, sounds good, Mike.
Awesome. Sounds good. And even got one from chat, so thank you. All right, just want to make sure I'm not talking to a muted self here. Sometimes that happens. All right, so on with the SPOG integration. Let's tell you what you're in for here in this presentation. Session overview, take us about an hour, might run a little longer. Who knows how it all goes. A little bit more slides here than I'd maybe hoped for, but some of them will go kind of quick. Goal is successful completion of the SPOG wizard, whatever the heck a SPOG is, as we'll define for you. If you've got questions, where applicable, let me know. If you've got input, where applicable, please chime in. I'm certainly, as everyone is at this point in time, newer to the whole SPOG thing, so I can tell you what I did to make stuff work in my lab environment. Hopefully it will help you out. If you've got some other useful advice, we're all about listening to that as well. So, general steps to success with the SPOG and some tidbits about where to actually go to look for errors, assuming you don't make it successfully through the first time. What we're going to cover, what is a SPOG? That would be good. Some general considerations before you go integrating this thing called package CCE. Preparation and system requirements. We'll call it an abbreviated format. We'll tell you some other documents you might ought to think about. Software installation overview, just kind of a quick review of what you should be doing and what you, more importantly, you should not be doing if you want this to actually work. If you know too much, you probably get yourself in trouble is what the deal is. Most of my efforts probably getting this thing actually to function regarded around certificate work. This morning we had a discussion on a key tool command and some VOS certificate server management. We'll briefly go over what you're doing in here, but if you want more details, you might refer back to that discussion we had this morning. It's been recorded, slides will be posted, all that good stuff. We'll actually get into running the wizard, the PCCE integration wizard, which is going to produce this thing called the SPOG. And we'll somewhere along the way tell you where to look when things go bad, not necessarily in this order, but we'll see problems early on and want to know where to go to look for some trouble. Some general thoughts about what to do after the wizard is completed. After you get this SPOG built, there's still plenty of things you must do after the fact. So we'll have some general discussions about that as well. So what I liken this process to, maybe getting packaged working in 12.5, you know, is supposed to be easy, as was, I thought, was going to be the stump. It was going to be pretty easy to get out of the ground. And on Sunday of this week, this is Friday, Sunday I started digging the stump out and seemed like a forever process, but I'm happy to report that as of Thursday, that would be yesterday, that stump is now pulled out of the ground. And certainly tractor helps, but that's a little bit analogous to what you might be feeling if you're trying to put package together, is especially if you've got some knowledge, you think, what's going on here? Why is this not working? So hopefully the information we're going to help you with today will help you to successfully create this thing called the SPOG. And what is the SPOG? Well, the SPOG is short for single pane of glass. The single pane of glass is a tool that for packaged version 12, 12.5 is what we're using in this demonstration here. The SPOG takes the place of several other administrative interface tools that we have historically had to alt-tab between or jump around between within, browser sessions or whatnot. So we certainly know about CCE admin historically. You're familiar with a tool called Configuration Manager. That's where most of our Explorer tools and list tools have been for adding agents, skill groups, whatnot. And slowly but surely, things have been ported over to more of a web tool. And you might say this is the ultimate iteration of the web tool, the web interface we're using for CCE administration. You'll notice gone are a lot of the tools in Configuration Manager. Now everything that you typically do for CCE, adding agents and whatnot, is in this thing called the SPOG. Your ops console, as you used to know it, no longer exists in the package world. You don't need to install one of those servers because all that functionality is here in the SPOG. Finesse administration. So if you need to modify Finesse desktop layouts and variables and phone books and blah, 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 all that's done in the SPOG. IDS, we'll have a separate session at some point in time for single sign-on. So your identity services server administration is done actually through the SPOG. VVB, which are your newer generation VXML gateways, all done through the SPOG. ECE is administered even through the SPOG. Some additional setup required. We've, of course, got ECE courses you can come attend. So the SPOG seems pretty cool. It's a packaged interface only. If you're a UCCE customer in version 12, you don't see the SPOG. You still just have CCE Web Admin. Most of your stuff is still in Configuration Manager. At some point in time, likely we'll all be pushed towards the SPOG because we'll all be pushed towards sizing, of package these days, a whole lot of agents it supports. Interesting of note here a little bit up top here, it says UCCE management. In some fairness, this is a beta version that I was taking these screenshots on, so all bets are off a little bit. So some general considerations of trying to get packaged installed. Your ultimate goal is to produce that thing called the SPOG. That way you know that you can now start working on stuff. So, where do you begin? Well, as with everything, probably some documentation. We no longer have SRNDs. We've got these things called solution design guides. And you probably want to be familiarizing yourself with the PCCE Solutions Design Guide, noting there's a different one for PCCE than UCCE. That's all of your traditional sizing and what you can and can't do and where to place stuff. So that's good light reading in general. You're definitely going to want to have on hand, before you start this adventure, the installation and upgrade guide for packaged and the admin and config guide. You kind of, well, if you're me, I'm not that smart, people, but if you're me, I kind of thought the admin and config guide, that would really just be kind of day 2 stuff. And really quickly found out that's not true. The install and upgrade guide really just speaks about putting the systems together and in place. But initializing actually the package wizard happens in the admin and config guide. So ultimately you'd want to read both of those. You'll want to think about obvious things like your deployment model. Am I in production or a lab environment? If I'm in a lab environment, do I want to do duplex versus simplex? We'll have some of these discussions along the way. Certificates, self-signed or CA signed. We had some good discussions this morning. What's your pain threshold, ultimately? Besides, a lot of different changes in the CCE world, one of the major-ish changes, or, certainly larger changes, is CCE's decoupling from historical Active Directory behavior. Good example of that is, you've seen recently that ICM used to create a Active Directory user for you if a supervisor didn't already exist, and now it has no part in that. You must have a supervisor in AD before you make them a supervisor. Same thing with the service accounts. ICM installation used to create some Active Directory service accounts for things like SQL. It does not do that for you. Part of the installation is you actually have to do some of that, jump through some of those hoops to make it work. And to that point, there are several what I call hiding, or not necessarily hidden, but hiding things in the install guides for IIS and for permissions on root drives and other install requirements. So Read those fine manuals is what you want to make sure you do over there, and make sure you kind of read and heed. Your goal basically is to get the software installed, the software being PCCE software, ICM, CVP, Call Manager, but basically configure nothing. As we're going to show you here, the wizard is what's hopefully going to do the work for you. So only do the minimal stuff overall. If you've been wondering why we've now got two kind of process of the installation, we have to install software and then we have to configure the software. It's where it all kind of comes together. You just install the software and something else configures it for you. Kind of cool. You'll be tempted to maybe read things along the way. They'll tell you put this license file for CVP on the blah, blah, blah folder. And at least in 12.5, no stinking license is needed for things like CUIC, CVP, ICM. You are going to be licensed, bound at some point, smart licensing, but get this thing working initially. I think you can get it up and running without too much difficult with licensing. Bunch of stuff to configure after the fact. So of course, we're going to recommend you come to a sunset learning class to help you and your other people you're trying to support with good day 2 support stuff. So some preparation, generally speaking, and system requirements. We're going to talk to you about ultimately this thing called an inventory file. The inventory file that we're going to produce via a template that's provided is going to help the system to know how many of what type of servers we have that'll match your deployment model, and information pertaining to your, by example, UCS environment. More information on that yet to come. You're probably going to want to be smarter than I am and actually check out things that Cisco provides like OVA files, even if you're doing this maybe in your basement or a lab environment, just because the OVA files will help you to not have to second guess the size of hard drives and have, most of your work done, only figure out, oh, I guessed wrong in the hard drive space. By example, in my lab only beta software installation duplexed environment, I ended up needing a 750 gig hard drive for DAW2. Literally none of it's used, and it might be because of the beta software I was using, but check out the OVA files. They'll probably at least get you close on sizing. What I was trying to do was take images with new SIDs from stuff we built previously and see if it would work there, and well, it didn't. So don't learn that lesson the hard way. Generally speaking, we're all on server 2016 for the Windows stuff, SQL 2017 for loggers and AW databases over there. No more support for generic PGs. That's been going on a while. But in the package world, you're going to find that packaged automatically installs for you 3 PGs per server, at least in the lab environment. 1 PG pair for call manager, media routing, and our VRU PG. CVP, no OAMP, no ops console. Forget about installing that thing. Reporting server, if you're doing a lab only, you don't actually have to have one to get the wizard to run. It skips that step. You can certainly add one after the fact, but don't need one. Call manager cluster, nothing special there. You got to have services activated, about CTI, call manager, or whatnot. One different thing here is we're using Axle now, a little bit like Express. You have to define one Axle account with permissions that you'll see, and that Axle account via the wizard is actually what's going out there creating your JTAPI users for you. Finesse servers pretty much installed a cluster, got the, whatever it takes to get the cluster installed, primary, log into the primary, tell it about the secondary, install the secondary, then pretty much done with that. Stop right there. So let's take a look at a couple of key screenshots. The goal, people, at least in this scenario, was to get this to work. So brief overview of what we're trying to make work. Trying to make package work in this lab-only model. This lab-only model has a couple of roggers, 2 routers and loggers, one on side A, one on side B. A pair of PGs. These PGs are actually 3 PGs in one server. A PG that's going to be talking to call manager cluster, some on side A and some on side B. Another PG talking to some media routing stuff, not listed here or required to make it work initially. And a third PG to talk to our CVP servers. So I got 2 call servers. One of these is actually a reporting server. It actually says so right there. CUIC sub, and we should be listing a pub over here. Finesse pub and sub. So typo on the picture here. A couple of DAWs, a primary and a secondary. Primary is going to be your chief server where you're going to be doing your initial work from. So goal is to get all this stuff built plus whatever gateways we need, proxies. That's kind of agnostic to the packaged implementation, but all these Windows and VOS servers, goal is to kind of get them all built, but not really configured. And somehow magically it's going to get it all itself configured. So we'll show you what's up with that. Some general considerations in regard to installing the software. As always, pay attention to your SQL installation on your ICM servers. Make sure you're using that binary sort order that's, Latin general. That's been historically something going on. Installation manuals, sometimes unclear about Windows or mixed mode. You're going to want mixed mode if you're doing stuff like CUIC, so just go with mixed mode. Don't forget about your protocol selection order and all that stuff. It's all laid out in the installation guides. Just pay attention to all that stuff. Make sure you do it. Seems to help. Again, just showing you a snippet here of the ICM software installation. I actually started off the adventure based on our timeline with version 12 and ended up upgrading to 12.5. Nothing special did I do here, just installing the ICM software. Takes, 15 minutes. And then from there, we'll tell you, don't touch it. Only thing you might want to do after you install software, if this is a newer installation and you're doing new stuff, would be to run Domain Manager to carve yourself a brand new instance somewhere within your Active Directory environment. Other than that, do not do what you think you should be doing, like running web setup. You're on web setup, your package thing, that's one of the first things it checks. See if somebody ran web setup. If you ran web setup, hope you got a snapshot. One thing that, I don't know if you need to do this or not, but it was done early on before I took a snapshot, and then after the fact, I couldn't go back in time, but I did run the SSL encryption utility on all the ICM servers because somebody told me to do that at Cisco. And I'm not sure if that should, in fact, be done or not, but it's part of all SSL things that we'll be talking about, so perhaps. CVP, nothing special there. Installed a couple CVP servers. You now have the choice in here of picking what codec you're going to use, MULA, ALA on 729 as well, so nothing too fantastic special about that. Picked a drive to install CVP, still have a media server that gets installed there, had my X509 stuff, about 20 minutes of watching paint dry, and a password, we were done. Okay, reporting server, again, optional for a lab environment. Got to have hard drive space. Again, OVAs will help you out there. And of course, a super secret password at the end that you are using for your reporting users that are local. And now what it's time for after we've got all of our ICM servers installed and built, private networks, all that other good stuff you know about, CVP servers installed, nothing's configured yet. Call manager's out there invisible. You ping everything. Time to run the PCCE deployment wizard. PC's deployment wizard, you of course access via what you traditionally access the web admin tool via, your IP or host name of your AAW, whack CCE admin. CCE admin traditionally logged us into the CCE web admin tool, and that's what it's doing here. Kind of gives you initially a limited SPOG, not too many options. One of your options you're going to go for is your deployment option. Might need to use the F5 key there to do some refreshes. That seems to be what I noticed along the way. And what you're going to be picking is initially here your deployment. And of course, I went with the PCCE lab mode, supports 2,000 agents, has some looser restrictions that we'll talk about than actually one of the real versions. But notice what we're up to now with the packaged environment. 12,000 agents, that's a whole lot of agents out there. As we'll talk about, what you pick here will kind of determine what screen you say thereafter. Notice what I'm picking is the package lab mode. Have to pick an instance, so I had to have an instance defined initially, but these are our options on the right-hand side. All right, sounds good. So I picked as my option package CCE 2,000 agents. So in this particular example, what if I go with a non-lab, truly based reference model? Well, notice that one of the things that they're asking you for in the non-lab reference model is basically host information for not where all your servers are, but really where your UCS or spec-based servers are, so that it can actually go out and inventory all of your hardware. If you're trying to do this on the cheap or not use exactly all the right OVAs or not the right amount of memory, you probably don't want this option for your lab in your basement. You probably want the lab version, as we'll show you. The lab version asks you to put that same information in there, but doesn't actually go out and do an inventory of what you've actually got built. So that's the difference. You also have to specify whether or not you're doing spec-based or UCS reference model. The next question that comes up, if I can back up just 2 pages here to our example we're going to go with, we're going to do this packaged lab mode only. And one of the next tabs that come up that I didn't actually have the screenshot that shows you what it's picking from is going to be this inventory tab. And when you get to this inventory tab, it's going to ask you to provide an inventory file. And if you don't have one, it gives you a choice to download a template. And the template comes in one of 2 forms, at least for the lab only. You can do simplexed or duplexed. In a lab only, you can actually build a simplexed PCCE system, which we'll talk about. Well, I went with the duplexed, and the duplexed inventory file comes as a shell, as a template, if you will. You have to fill in all of the particulars, which let me at least briefly discuss what's going on here. Key thing with the template file, it actually gives you up top all of the fields and what the field names are. And what we're really trying to do here ultimately with this template file is create a bunch of servers of a bunch of different types in the second column. And the names of those servers show up. And based on the names I've got in here, hopefully you can kind of see what the names are. Actually, the first 2 names are my UCS servers. And I just used bogus IP addresses here because, again, in that lab-only environment, it does not go out there and do an inventory. The other servers, though, they must exist. They must have the right IP addresses, host names, blah, 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 blah. And what you're looking at here in the 3rd and 4th line, by example, are my 2 roggers, what their machine types are, their visible IP addresses, and their private IP addresses. So because I'm doing duplex stuff here, I got to have a, just like you would normally, private IP address, public IP address, etc. And what side they live on, side A or side B. Same thing for my duplex PGs on the next 2 lines. And the next 2 lines after that are my 2 AWs. Now, what's interesting about the AW is you'll notice the machine type here says diagnostic portal. It's also got my username. So whatever username I typically log into on that AW using my diagnostic framework Portico, which by default is your administrator account. You could have used domain manager to add other service accounts for that. I'm providing that in there. I'm also providing what my super secret password is and what side that's on. Side B doesn't need all that stuff, so it's just all comma separated in this case. I've got some CDP servers. The CDP servers usernames down here are just the local administrator accounts on that server, whatever those passwords are. My call manager servers, pubs, and in this case 2 subs because I'm building a duplex lab. Got to have 1 pub, got to have 1 sub per side basically in this duplexed environment. So I've got to have a total of 3 servers. Notice that what I've got here is a Axel user built-in call manager named Axel Rose, and that's what that user's password is. So that's just a regular user that's got access to Axel functionality via your groupings there in call manager. CUIC, there's a cluster of those servers. There's a pub and a sub. The username I'm using over here of CUIC admin, that's the application username and password. Same thing with Finesse. Finesse has an application username and password. So it's basically kind of an answer file. If you ever had to set up the command line tool that's built in ICM, or really even your RTMT, the analysis manager, you're basically seeding those tools with a bunch of server names, IP addresses, usernames, and passwords that could log in there. That's effectively what you're doing in this answer file. This answer file it asks you for, it goes out there and actually does and looks through that inventory, make sure you have all those devices listed based on your settings. And then what I kind of screwed up here as well, sorry people, I failed to take the screenshot of actually the settings tab. If you make it past the inventory, you come to the settings tab, ignore this. The settings tab asks you a mobile agent settings question and also asks you that service account credential information. So I've got a user out here called ECE service account I picked. That was part of that installation process. We told you to read those fine materials out there, and it tells you about setting up that service account for your loggers and AWs. And then you're off to the initialize screen. And the initialize screen is where the wizard truly goes out there and does its magic. You notice it's trying to complete some number of steps to actually get package set up. First thing it's doing is making sure you got some, looks like private IP addresses on your loggers and your PGs. Making sure that web setup hasn't been run by somebody along the way, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So when you get here, don't get too excited and, you know, keep your eyeballs peeled on the screen, because likely what'll happen is you'll have something not go quite so well. Made it all the way through step 4, got to step 5. Oh man, JTAPI client installation seemed to fail. Got some information we see here, shows up on the screen, error initializing the deployment. Something didn't go so well with JTAPI client, got a timeout condition. If I look closer at some of the errors, which we'll show you, kind of figured out that trying to get to call manager, it looked like we had some kind of error trying to do some kind of a put operation on that thing. So unknown source, interesting. Well, pointing out to you that if you encounter errors in the wizard, where are you going to go to look at log files? This wizard, we logged onto the primary DAW. Primary DAW Tomcat is where you're going to go to look at some log files. So wherever ICM was installed to, in this case, the D drive, I'm going to the ICM folder, looking in the Tomcat subdirectory, looking at the logs file. I'm going to sort by the date on this log file. I'm going to make sure I look at my watch, chronometer, whatever you're using, computer. Whenever you encounter this error, look at that screen first off and see what time it is. Right? Go now to one of these log files and see if you can find some error that shows you what's going on with the event. This is not the same error we're just showing here, but we're showing you somewhere in one of those log files is that event. What I seem to notice is that you've got an error log file that's all date time stamped, and you've got a CCBU log file. And you might think that the error log file would just show you the errors. It's typically smaller in size than the CCBU, and it is typically a subset of the errors, but I seem to actually find better information by actually looking at the CCBU log file. The error log file told me, yep, you got an error. It ain't going to work. It just didn't really tell me what error I had. And in true fashion, you kind of have to look at maybe a couple of lines and figure out what's going on to actually come to some conclusion about the error. We'll show you some examples along the way. So that's what to look at. And as it turns out, in order to get all these steps to run, which here's a listing of all the steps that actually happen, they obviously weren't all complete at this point in time, but there are the 34 steps that go on. If you do a simplex, it only takes like 19 steps, but it's all the same steps minus any of the side B things. And the only wacky thing about the lab only environment, the reason it completes only 33 of 34 steps is it doesn't actually deploy the reporting server for whatever reason. I'm not sure why it doesn't do that, but that's one of the steps it skips in the lab only. But basically what you should take out of this list after you just briefly here, you should, maybe study it, is all those things you used to do when you set up ICM, like, better log in, better actually go through the router setup, and better tell it how many DMP connections I have. Better go to my PGs and tell it about the private networks and the visible networks and how many PIMs to have, blah, 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 blah. That's what the wizard is doing for you. It's actually going out there creating your PGs and your routers and your loggers and your CUIC users and finesse SQL users. So if any of that stuff goes wrong, take note of what process failed and think about what you might have done. And, if it's, by example, a CUIC SQL error, well, maybe you didn't follow one of those steps that said assign some special permissions to that service account so they can actually go out there and create some SQL users, as an example. From there, I would say the main problem I had was really all certificate based. And as I discussed in the lecture this morning, I started off using self-signed certificates, which basically means you got to have certificates from everybody everywhere, and ultimately ended up using a certificate server. And I'd say the certificate server was seemingly a much faster, better, smoother way to go, which is what I'm going to kind of show you here. I'm not going to get into all the details about what we're doing just because we talked about that this morning, and we only got another 25 minutes to go and some more discussion. So if you want more information about some of the certificate stuff, refer to this morning's discussion about things like the key tool command. Basically, we've got two different types of servers that need to be authenticated. Between all the servers, that would be my voice operating system servers and my Windows servers, starting off with the VOS servers, going to the OS administration page, so CM platform, and doing some certificate administration here, generating a certificate signing request, good for the entire cluster. So that would include my Finesse servers and CUIC and call manager servers. From there, I get to download my certificate request, and I'm going to download this request and, of course, use this to submit that to my CA server. My CA server in the real world, we'd be paying some money to right now, but in our lab, we're using a Windows CA server. And adding that CSR as the text information to the request, and then having the CA server produce for us a downloadable certificate that we can now re-import and be authorized for. Of course, we need also a copy of the root CA certificate. So while we're here, we're going to download the root CA certificate. Now we're back into our VOS servers, and the key thing is if you're using certificate authority services, each server has to have a copy of the CA certificate that's uploaded to the server as a Tomcat Trust certificate purpose type. There's the CA certificate. You got to do that first. And you also have to have the signed certificate from the certificate authority server. That gets uploaded as a Tomcat type. And here's the file from there. Notice that after we upload those, we've got to restart Cisco Tomcat. Information tells us here somewhere along the way to do that. So that takes care of all of our voice operating system servers, call manager, CUIC, Finesse, live data, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Windows servers, we need to make use of this thing called the key tool command. As we talked about this morning, the key tool command is a command line command that, depending on the ICM or CVP server you're on, you have to be in the correct folder in order to make use of this command, because you have to be modifying this file that exists on each server that's named something different. So to show you an example here, we are on an ICM server. We might have some old entries in our key store database. So notice that we're in some kind of a, sorry, hang on one second. Let me go back here, hit the right button. We're in some key store folder location where in that folder exists this file called CA certs. CA certs is a file we have to modify for our entries. So we're showing you here key tool list command. We've got an alias already in our key store named DAW1. Our goal is to delete that entry, that alias, out of our key store named CA certs. Our password is changed it in here. And when we list it now again, we don't have that certificate in there. We might have been using self-signed certificates up to this point in time. So we've got one in there that was stale, old. We want to delete that one so that now we can turn around and on our ICM servers, generate a brand new key pair. So when you generate a new key pair, what you're filling in is basically all of your X509 information. Things like what kind of bit encryption am I using, RSA for the algorithm that we're going to use. And most importantly, somewhere along the way it asks you for information like what's your organizational unit, what's your organization, what's your city, your state, your country of origin. First question it asks you for at least in this wizard, it asks you for your first and last name. Well, initially I thought first and last name, I'm not putting my first and last name in there. I'm just going to skip that field. Well, somewhere hidden in the documentation, it said, oh, don't do that. You'll hose yourself later. Make sure that what you want to put in there in this command line tool for this command, use your fully qualified domain name. So notice that my canonical name, if you will, what it's really asking me for there, is my fully qualified domain name of, in this case, I'm on my primary DAW. So I'm trying to really generate a new certificate request in my primary DAW is what I'm trying to do here, just like I did over there in Call Manager. So now I've got a new request that's generated on the server, but I got to download it because I need to download it so I can send it off to the CA server. So here's another tool we again talked more in detail about this morning. Still using the key tool command with a cert request command line switch. And what that allows you to do is basically go and download this file with an alias name. And you're doing that again from the CA certs key store. So now what I have is a certificate request. Looks like a bunch of gibberish in Notepad that I can use as a submission to my CA server. So I'm back to the same spot, putting my request in, downloading my certificate, and what comes back now is in here somewhere. Oh, there you go. This file right here, daw1.cer. So this certificate right up here was the certificate authority certificate. This certificate right here is the one that I just got signed. And both of these certificates, if I'm using a certificate authority server, have to be shoved back into my ICM server. So just like our VOS servers, what we've got to now do is turn around, use this key tool command, and actually import two of those certificates. One certificate has an alias of root. That's my CA certificate. One certificate has an alias of my fully qualified domain name. That's my other signed certificate that I'm importing. And I'm importing both of those to that CA certs file, really, is what I'm doing. After I do that, got to restart Tomcat, just like I had to on my VOS servers. I got to restart Tomcat on all my ICM servers or reboot the whole thing. If you were to actually, before you do a reboot, maybe you do this key tool list command. What you could actually see down here is this item highlighted, chain length of 2. That basically indicates to me that I have both a CA signed certificate in the chain as well as the locally signed certificate. Cool. CVP now you're on to. So you took care of all your VOS servers, you took care of your ICM. DAW is all you've done this on so far. And now you're on to your CVP servers, where you're again trying to do some more work in its key store. Unfortunately, as we described in more detail this morning, the key tool command is not in your search path, and the key store you're modifying is in some other hidden folder. So you end up having to maybe go to this folder and use search information for actually how to find this key tool command. The other inconvenient thing about your CVP servers is, unlike ICM, where the password for all of those key stores is just change it, the password here on all of your CVP servers is hidden in a security properties file that's in your Cisco CVP conf folder. So this hidden password is unique across all servers. You got to highlight that password, copy it to Notepad somewhere, because you're going to need it for the following commands. Just like the ICM servers, which were just like the VOS servers, what we have to do on our CVP servers is run the key tool command to generate a key pair with the appropriate key size, key algorithm, all the correct command line switches to make this thing run. When we get asked for things like your first and last name, you better, as we just talked about, be putting in your fully qualified domain name, not, Fred Jones. Okay. Next thing we want to do is we probably want to run the key tool command with that cert request command line switch to basically generate a file that is our certificate request that we're going to submit to the CA server. We download that file, we send that off to the CA server, get that thing signed, and don't forget, as we discussed with the other first two items, we now have to turn around and import to our key store the alias of root, which is really our CA certificate. Do that first, plus then we have to also do an import to the same key store, our other alias of our FQDN, and that's actually our locally signed certificate signed by the CA. So one's the CA, one is the signed CA, right? One is the generating, one is the download. That was common across all of those platforms, even though it was done slightly different across all three platforms. The theory was still the same. And if you still have some web certificate issues, right, when you try to still log on to the web page that can get you in the SPOG, well, that just means that you didn't actually go to IIS. Remember, IIS is different than Tomcat. It's a different web server. You might have to go to IIS and actually generate certificates here, get them signed, re-upload them, make sure that certificate's in your local browser. And now maybe you won't get those annoying error messages anymore. That's kind of just a convenience thing a little bit. And you might think, oh, are we done yet? And I would say no. To save you some time while you're here, you might at this point in time might get the SPOG to actually run, but after you got the SPOG running, you probably notice you have some issues still in what we call the inventory. And while you're here, if you want to eliminate that altogether, what you're probably going to want is not only those signed certificates from that CA certs file, you're probably going to want as well to add in certificates for the Diagnostic Framework Portico. Diagnostic Framework Portico seemingly is how the PCCE thing goes out and actually does an inventory to make sure everything is running. So here's kind of just a preview glimpse into errors you might encounter after this wizard runs, which we haven't run yet. So we're trying to save you some time right here. What you probably want to do before you go too crazy and even run the wizard, save yourself some time. Use Firefox, because Firefox is going to allow you to download this file in a decent format. Use Firefox as a browser and go out to all your CVP servers. Put in this URL here with the correct server name. This URL gets you to the diagnostic portal page. And you're going to get some kind of certificate error message. That's fine. View that certificate. Go out there and export it, download it, save it as some kind of a file name. Do that on all your CVP servers. On your ICM server, that primary AW, go back to that server and rerun that key tool with that import switch and add those servers that you just got from CVP. You can add them as a PIM file over here. Give them an alias name. Put them in that key store, right? Restart Tomcat. While you're there, add in all of your other ICM Diagnostic Framework Portico certs. So go to your 2 routers and your loggers and your PGs. Go to the Diagnostic Framework Portico page, download all of those certificates. Put those on your ICM AW. You don't have to put the ICM AW in there because it's already got one. But all of your other routers and loggers and PGs, add those certificates into your CA certs file as well. That'll save you some time. Restart Tomcat. Okay. And now you've got a boatload of certificates somewhere. You probably saved them all to some drive. Don't forget, from a client perspective, well, 2 things. One is you did all this work so that all these servers could talk to one another. Okay, that's all you've done so far. But if you don't want to have a bunch of annoying messages show up on your browser window when you go to administer CCE Web Admin, or when you go to run the Diagnostic Framework Portico, if you don't like that pop-up screen that says, hey, your site isn't trusted, click here to get out or click here to continue. If you don't want to see that stuff, you're going to need copies of all these certificates or something of that nature. So here we're just showing you that you put all those certificates into group policy and then shove those down to all of your Active Directory users. That'll save you time going around each and every server in the network. So that's just some type saving stuff. So notice one of those certificates out there is actually the CA certificate. Other certificates are all those other certificates we worked with and talked about along the way. And lo and behold now, people, if you went back and run that wizard, things actually should work better. It should truck all the way through. Notice here it says completing 33 of 33 steps. It's actually 34 steps. It didn't install that reporting server for CVP, but it looks like it did all the rest of those things. Installed JTAPI and Tomcat and did assistant inventory and blah, blah, blah. Some cool stuff. Confirmation of that is the fact that now what you should be able to do is log out of your browser after that wizard completes. It says, hey, close down the browser and log out or whatnot and log back in. And once you do, what you should see now is, of course, this thing called SPOG. And before you only had a couple of objects. Now you've got 7 default, what they call cards that show up. Each of these cards is basically an area of observation. In theory, they're somewhat color-coded based on day 1 or day 2 support. So again, I'm not sure exactly the color codes. If you know the TSA color codes, you're good. And don't forget that you still, at this point in time, aren't done configuring things. You still have a bunch of other things to add, like VVBs and CUIC and finesse and your patterns and paths and variables and maybe stuff like ECE. So sounds like you better come back for a sunset class. Get yourself all educated. And speaking of which, let me, before you run off or start asking questions, let me at least pop this up there. This is what the marketing people wanted me to show you. Since you were kind enough to attend our session, giving you a 20% discount if you use this code good through June 30th on some education there, people. So hopefully you'll take us up on it. Let me pause right here and say, who has some questions? Got to have some questions out there. Nobody.
Hey, sorry, this is Aaron. Quick question about 2 questions. What is the minimum, what do you call it, VMware version, vSphere version that supports this product, right? And number 2 is concerning if you have a fully fledged UCCE product, what is the advantage or disadvantage of switching to the PCCE in that case, besides maybe simplicity of the product and that sort of thing? Thanks.
I can definitely answer question number 1 and take a stab at question number 2, which is subjective, I think, for each customer. But question number 1, let me tell you why I ran into trouble. We had, when we first started this adventure, we actually had our UCS servers. And the servers behind the scenes were not actually up to the right version of UCS-edness to actually work with the OVA templates that I could have downloaded and saved myself some work, right? Since then, everything has been fixed. So this what I'm here to tell you is, if you want to use the OVAs from Cisco, the OVAs actually define and specify what UCS version you must be running, vSphere, in order to make the thing work. If you're trying to build this for a lab, use the OVA files, open them up in Notepad and read through them. Use them as baseline guidelines to say, all right, I'm going to need this big of a hard drive and about this much memory and whatnot. So what can make it work is a whole lot less than what the OVA requires. What version of UCS stuff do you have to be running is really, I'd say, only pertinent for specific use of the OVAs. If you're trying to kind of cheat a little bit in your basement network, the installation guide or installation processes I went through, like the DAW on side B, I thought whatever hard drive that I had created should be big enough on the DAW, but as it turns out, no, it needed 750 gigabytes. And the install file told me that. I had to do some searching and backtrack, but if you're just trying to cheat a little bit in your basement network, you can get away with a whole lot of stuff. Does that answer your first question more or less? It's a little bit round the bend there.
Yes. Sorry. Yes, that's good. No. Sorry, I was on mute.
No problem. Now, your $1 million question was, why does somebody running UCCE want to go to PCCE? Basically, right?
Yes, that is correct.
And that's, Well, Cisco told us to is one good answer. I think, this is me personally, but I think if I can look at the writing on the walls, I can see that at some point in time, UCCE as we know it may not exist, right? I think if you see what Cisco is trying to do with getting migration tools built to migrate people from UCC to PCC, if you see the agent count, if nothing else, if you see the fact that they're not doing any design work to incorporate the SPOG into UCCE, why is that? I don't know. UCCE maybe will go away. Now, again, I don't know if it's actually factual at all. Maybe, maybe not. It could be crazy, but that's just kind of what I see. So I see it as ultimately that's where we'll all end up at some point in time. It's just when and where do you maybe want to do that? What's convenient for you? Other than that, I think the SPOG perhaps offers some advantage. It's one place to get into to configure things. I think from my perspective, I see some of that being cool, some of it actually not being as cool. It used to be easier for me to tell you that, hey, I'm configuring CVP stuff because I'm logged into CVP, and then I guess I'm logged into CVP, I'm configuring CVP stuff. I'm logged into ICM, I'm configuring ICM stuff. But now I'm logged into this one box, and now I, as an instructor, have to tell you, well, if you're in this card, you're configuring CVP stuff. But if you're in this card, you're kind of doing ICM stuff. A bit harder to see that perspective, but then again, maybe the stuff we configure is supposed to be simpler. So I don't know. Who else has input out there? Why do your people want to go to packaged versus UCC? Well,
like you said, that's the future. We went to a troubleshooting thing at Cisco where they confirmed that that's the direction that they're moving in.
Yeah, and some of those partner summits, they effectively allude to that. If you've attended some of those, some of you are certainly partners out there. So that seems to be where they're headed, right?
And just to add to that conversation, where does the WebEx call center land in the assumed grand scheme of things going forward?
Right. Well, I guess technically this is some form of WebEx contact center. Right? This is a premise-based contact center solution, but it all falls under the WebEx umbrella, right? I guess I can safely say this because I also, in my spare time, teach that other product for Cisco, CJP, used to be CJP, now called the WebEx Contact Center or something or other. And that's the cloud-based WebEx Contact Center we might be thinking about, the BroadSoft acquisition piece. And remember, it all falls under the whole unified-ish WebEx based thing. I don't know if that's the correct technical definition for all that, but technically all the stuff is under the WebEx umbrella, if that helps. As I understand it anyway. Anybody else understand that?
Yeah.
So you're WebExing, man. Right? Except for don't tell anybody because you're on Zoom right now. Okay. So
Yes.
That's kind of anti-vendor there, Mike.
Don't point that out. That's not fair.
Question on the earlier slide where you had all the utilities. There was an SSL utility, and I was wondering how that fit in as compared with the key tool thing that we talked about for certificates. Like, what's the difference? Why would you have both?
Yeah, I don't know. I got a handle on that. It's somewhere I've got some other slides where I was doing the stare and compare of actually the certificate itself to see what kind of went on. And I don't know that I ever got a good answer from anybody that was supposed to know to help me out with that. It was one of those, hey, do this before you do anything and then it'll work. But let me go back to where that picture was and show you what the heck we're talking about. It's in here somewhere. That'll do right there. So always been there, been built into ICM. When you install ICM the first time through, you get the CCE program group, right? It's not the admin program group, but you get the CCE program group, which has all these popular shortcuts in there, right? PG setup, web setup, system CLI, et cetera, and SSL encryption utility. The SSL encryption utility, secure sockets layer encryption utility, allows you to basically, when you go in there, effectively create a certificate for the server that you're on. And so let's call that kind of doing, I guess, creating a self-signed certificate based on some key algorithm and bit set automatically that you, I guess, would maybe normally use if, back in the day for just SSL stuff. What I'm unsure about is if I actually had to do that in reality the first time through. I suspect perhaps not, because I'm doing all that key store management through that key tool utility, modifying the CA certs. At one point in time, there are two different certificates, and I was downloading, looking at stuff, wondering what was going on there. But it seems like one of them is really more diagnostic framework Portico based, and one of them is CCE admin based. I don't know that I actually have a handle on where all those certs that fit in, but you may or may not have to run that SSL encryption utility before you start the SPOG. I would try to not do that and go through these steps, and if something doesn't work, maybe go back and try that out. But anybody else have any thoughts on that use of that utility? I know that's a bit of a evasive answer there, but a very knowledgeable person at Cisco that I was working with at the time said, we want to run that before we run this wizard, but that was very early beta-ish releases of the ICM software at the time. So when a bunch of stuff wasn't really working very well. So
In your
what else?
You showed some errors for JTAPI, like step 4 out of the 33. Were those related to the call manager certificates, or do you remember?
They were. Yeah, let me go back to that, right? So, and this build is just, how I kind of try to portray things is that, I've done all this work so far and I'm running this wizard. Oh, shoot, I made it through the inventory. I made it to initialize. Well, probably something bad's going to go on. Now, this was one particular error. This error actually occurred back when I was still doing self-signed certificates. And all I'm simply pointing out there is that, keep your eye on this. It'll tell you about an error. It might tell you useful information. Don't forget, I'm really trying to point out to you on the next page where to go to look for more details about an error. If you look closely, the error I'm looking at on this page is not the same error as the previous page. You don't really care about that. It's, similarly involved. And what that really just leads you into, at least in this discussion, was the fact that if you want to get all this stuff to work, you're not done because you're going to do a bunch of certificate stuff. That was kind of the tie-in there, the transition that we were hoping you would see. Does that make some sense?
Yep.
So I would say of all the errors I shut trouble on in that system along the way with trying to get it to work, most of them came down to, oh man, I don't have that certificate for that thing over on this box over here. And that's why it's not working. And that included not only those CA cert certificates, but the Portico certificates, the VOS server certificates. And when I was trying to do it self-signed, I started off in duplexed, and you saw that duplex list of servers. That's a lot of servers to make sure everybody has the right certificates on all the right spots. So it's painful. Use a CA server, people, if you can. Somebody's chatting me up over here. Let's see what they're chatting about. No problem. Glad we can help you out, clearing up some of the questions. And I think it's kind of new. And geez, I guess along the way here, worked with a couple people who are very smart people, been doing CCE a long time, and they were frustrated for a while, as was I. I had some pretty good help at Cisco to help me through that, but it's just like that tree stump. Hang in there, look at the log files, take it step by step. Fix 2 problems a day. Before you know it, you'll have 34 steps completed. So that helps you. One, sale I'll throw out there is that the final session this afternoon which happens at, I think, 2 p.m. Mountain Time. Right now it's about, call it 1 p.m. Mountain Time. So in about an hour, we have another session on adding a site to the packaged environment. So now that you've got one, your main location built, headquarters we'll call it, you can add other multiple sites to PCCE. And in case you can't make that session, keep in mind it'll be recorded and slides available. That's all cool. And the big picture there is, guessed it, what? You guessed it, more certificate work. So a lot of the same stuff we saw here with getting your additional site configured is probably the big news for that one. Spoiler alert. It is a Friday afternoon, so. Okay, anybody else have questions, people? Comments? PCCE thoughts? Hopefully we have helped you out with some things today. Saved you some time. If we save you at least 10 minutes, we're happy about that. Thank you, Bill. Appreciate that. All righty then. Well, I need to go off and do a couple more things, so I guess I will see all of you in about an hour, or at least some of you in about an hour. If we don't see in about an hour, hopefully all of you have a fine weekend, and hopefully you're all COVID-free out there and staying well. So, till next time.